Welcome back to Mommas Who Lead, the space where we hold big vision and big heart together. And today, this one is different. It's tender, it's fierce, and it's going to stretch you in the best way. Let me ask you something. Have you ever felt like your life was meant for something more, but you weren't sure how to really move forward? Or maybe you knew, but the vision felt way bigger than your current season of motherhood or messy middle. Well, you're about to meet someone who followed that whisper, even when it made no logical sense. Today, I am joined by the wonderful Kate Grant. She's the founding CEO of the Fistula Foundation and author of the powerful new memoir, No Woman Left Behind. She left a career on Madison Avenue, yes, that glamorous six-figure world of advertising, to fight for the women in the most remote corners of the globe. Her mission to help heal women suffering from obstetric fistula, a childbirth injury that robs women of their dignity, their health, and often their place in their society. She's led this foundation to fund over 100,000 surgeries. That's right, across 35 countries without government funding and with a whole lot of strategic grit and heart. This isn't just a nonprofit story. This is a leadership story, a mama story, and a your story. So grab your coffee, or if you're multitasking, just breathe in with me for a moment and get ready, because this one will shift something in you. Kate, welcome so much to the show. I'm so glad you're here.
Laura, it's a true pleasure, an honor, a delight to be here with you today.
I have to start with this. I was reading the first few pages of your book, and I had a moment where I literally just stopped and cried. It was a moment, and I hope I can get through with this without crying when we're talking about some of these heavy topics. But you described meeting a woman suffering from a fistula for the first time. That was gutting. And tell me about that moment. Like, what did you feel? What did it feel like? Not just like what exactly happened. Obviously, you share in there in the book, but how did you feel?
Well, what I felt was a sort of overwhelming set of emotions kind of all at once. I don't know if you've had that sense of kind of a flooding where it's sadness for what this woman has gone through. And just for your listeners, the woman's name was Hannah. She'd gotten this childbirth injury when she was 17. It left her incontinent. Her husband had left her. She'd been suffering. And in a remote part of rural Africa, when you don't have depend pads, you don't have hot and running water, you don't have the clothes that a lot of us don't even wear. We end up, donating to Goodwill. You got one or two things to wear. It's a very disabling, ostracizing injury. So meeting this woman and being like, oh my gosh, when I was 17, what was I thinking about? I was thinking about, I don't have a prom date. I read this in the book, my sister was prettier. My mom was more charming. My dad was smarter. Like, if I were confronting things, it was that. I was a sort of middle class, girl in the US. I wasn't, struggling with a hole in my vagina. That's what produces the incontinence, the bladder and the vagina. There are holes in them produced by childbirth. So there was this sort of sense of there, but for the grace of God go I. I mean that not so much in a theological context, but more the sense of I'm so lucky in ways I hadn't even thought of. And then, oh my gosh, the other feeling at the same time, this one sense of sort of gratitude and relief and, a sense of I'm lucky. And then the reverse of that, which is, again, this could have been me if I'd been born in rural Africa. This poor woman didn't get what she needed when she was delivering her baby. By the way, her baby also died, so she had that.
Oh, God.
So it was the combination of those things coming me at once. And this was a hospital, just for background, that was in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. It's the capital of Ethiopia. I was there with what's called a CODEL, a congressional delegation. It sounds very august, but it was basically staffers, and I was the only woman. So they said, you should head over to this hospital. And Laura, I'd never heard of fistula before. This was in 1994, it was 30 years ago. And in the cab on the way over, fistula to me, now I know that her husband's of Italian descent, so you probably know this isn't the case, but I was going through in my mind, and fistula almost sounded like it could be a proper Italian word, like fistula sauce for your pasta or fistula. It just had that ring to it, and they had been occupied by the Italians. So in my head, I was like, oh, maybe there's a long dead Italian, like a Mario Fistula or somebody that's, endowed this hospital. Now, you mentioned this to a doctor, and their eyes rolled that I didn't know what the word fistula meant. And just for background for your listeners, it's just a medical term for a hole between an inside organ and the outside world that shouldn't exist. So there are other kinds of fistulas, as you said, that you're outside. We treated obstetric fistula, which is, again, obstetric being childbirth and fistula being this injury to vagina, bladder, sometimes rectum. I just can't not say those body parts. I know they're somewhat, we don't, polite companies sit around the dinner table talking about such body parts, but those are the ones that are injured. So that's the bad news. But the good news, and what also moved my soul, like changed my life, was it's treatable. Usually a trained surgeon takes this poor woman like Hannah, who's been ostracized, treated like, in the words of Nick Kristof, the New York Times, a modern day leper, abandoned by her husband. And if you wanted to get me crying, you start thinking for a second, when you've gone through the worst things in your life, the biggest losses, what do you want? You want love around you.
Right.
You want people to love and embrace you. And what she had was the opposite of that. So that's all bad. But the good news is, again, most of the time, 90% of the time, a trained surgeon can take somebody like Hannah into an operating room, and an hour or so later, wheel her out, cured. Now she'll spend 2 weeks recuperating from the surgery, but she's going to be good to go when she leaves the hospital. And then will be generally accepted back into her community, able to participate, potentially marry again. So it was powerful. Again, the other thing was that the idea of being able to make such an incredible difference in somebody's life with something as simple as one surgery. Now, I don't when I say simple, that doesn't mean I could do it, or even a surgeon, in the US necessarily could do it. It's a specialized kind of surgery. That said, there are doctors that are trained to do this kind of surgery, and then you can give a woman back her life. That's the tagline of our foundation, is help give a woman a new life, which can sound like hyperbole, because I know we read magazines where it's like transformational, like, I don't know, facial cream, or, an eyeliner that will, give you a new being, or, make you different somehow. And, we use those terms here, somewhat thoughtlessly, but I think in terms of these women's lives, it really does make a difference. And that was the layers to that, seeing the loss and suffering, the fact that I was so lucky not to have experienced that. And yet there's a happy ending for this woman potentially awaiting, when she comes out of an operating room. So that's probably that's a very long answer to a short question.
No, it's good. I mean, I got goosebumps, like just thinking, like well, just knowing that women go through this every day over there. And here in the West, we have no idea that this is even occurring, and this is a major issue. And so I'm so grateful for you to bringing awareness to this issue, because there's so many women, just from reading everything about it, that goes without treatment. So your foundation is making an impact. It is changing women's lives. And when I was reading your story, you walked away from a big life on Madison Avenue just for this mission. I mean, most people don't do that. And, if they feel this little nudge to do something more, sometimes they silence it, but you didn't. What made you not do, what made you stand this up?
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, I took a trip. I was raised kind of middle class, oldest of 4 kids that were tightly spaced. And so what did that mean? It meant I didn't go to Europe during my summers. I worked during my summers. And, my parents helped with college. This wasn't some hard luck story, but there wasn't extra money to travel the world. And so I did finally, in my late 20s, take a trip and was gone for 7 months. I was not, by the way, just to be clear, this was no Mother Teresa mission. I was not out to save the world's poor. Cyndi Lauper, Girls Just Want to Have Fun. I went with a friend, and we spent the first 3 months in Europe, but the last 4 months we spent in Asia, in the poor parts of Asia, India, Nepal, what was in Burma now is Myanmar, Indonesia. And 30 plus years ago, and the poverty was just, it was relentless. And we weren't traveling like rich foreigners. We were traveling, I had some money, but not enough to travel. We were traveling on the cheap and got used to basically working, or not working, but traveling around people that were living with very little. And I came back to my advertising life, but I never really came all the way back. I didn't go on the trip I need to change direction in life. Like I said, I wanted just to see the world and have fun, and then came back. And what I realized I was doing on Madison Avenue, such as it was, I'd worked at two big firms, and we won it right out of college, and then another one that were winning Clios, these like Oscars for television ads. But when you really unpack it, Laura, what you're doing in advertising, it's not a bad endeavor, but particularly sophisticated advertising back in the day with television ads, you're using a lot of research to sort of crack into people's psyches and get them to care deeply emotionally about a branded product, to get them to feel an emotional attachment to a Pepsi can as opposed to a Coke can, to a McDonald's, Big Mac instead of a Whopper, a Burger King, or whatever it is. And when you really step back and realizing I'm using whatever God-given talents and education and other things I've got, and what I'm doing with those is, again, creating in some ways a silly attachment to something that makes somebody want to buy X versus Y. There were some dark nights to the soul when you really reckon with that. And it took, I mean, I didn't just immediately come back, by the way. I'm not sort of, Greta Thunberg. I'm like, okay, I have to leave this behind. I'm going to head off, into poverty. It took a couple of years, honestly, between just, I went to church. I went to a cruise. I thought a lot about it. And my initial thought was, I'll just leave, and I'll leave advertising, and I'll go do communication and nonprofit. And why didn't I do that? Because I thought I headed off in advertising without much thought. I was 21. I just wanted to make money. That was it. Make money, have fun. Mary Tyler Moore was my role model. I just wanted to have a kind of a glamorous, I put that in italics, life. And then you realize that it's, there was a sign in the wall in an office. I wrote about this in the book. One of the copywriters, it's something like, advertising is the nights are long, the days are hard, it's stressful, or something like that. But in the end, it's all worth it because the rewards are shallow, transparent, and meaningless. And every time I saw it, I thought oh, that sense in your gut, Laura, where you're like, that's a truth. And so you ask about what do you have to listen to over time? And it didn't happen overnight. You give the little voice a microphone. You listen to the whisper. You don't shut it down. That's part in your soul that's telling you what your own unique path is. And everybody's got their own path. My path is only mine, not necessarily yours or someone else's. But I do think we all, when we can listen, there's some deeper knowing part of us that can help us chart that path. The problem, at least for me, was I was listening to expectations of my parents. I was listening to expectations of classmates. I was, I think initially was the voices I was listening to were others. And it took me a while to basically disaggregate those and be able to listen to my own voice. And like I said a second ago, give it a mic, if you will. Listen to the whisper, give it some energy. And then I decided I really needed to go. I went back to graduate school. So before I ended up in Ethiopia, I'd gone back to graduate school because I thought, what did I learn as an undergrad? I learned how to sell stuff. And not that I used some of those skills, honestly, with the foundation, but I really thought if I'm going to make my goal be, how do I address global poverty? I want to have a toolkit to do that. And not just because if I head out with good intentions and not many skills, how am I going to help? I mean, I feel like I need to add to my toolkit here if I want to, sort of tackle some of these intractable problems related to poverty. And fistula, which we've already talked about, that really, Laura, is a symptom of poverty. It's why doesn't it happen here? Actually, and your listeners maybe find this interesting. In New York, there's a hotel called the Waldorf Astoria. It's on the Upper East Side of Manhattan, a big sort of posh hotel. Well, before that hotel was there in the 1890s on the same site, there was a fistula hospital in Manhattan because women used to get it here. Why? Because people used to be poor here. 130 years ago, there was a lot more poverty than there is now. Industrialization was just happening. Most births were happening at home. So if a woman was in obstructed labor, and not dissimilar thing could happen to her is what happened to women in rural Africa, which is they stay in labor for a long time and end up, if not dead from a ruptured uterus or sepsis, which is infection, you could end up with a fistula or some other injury. So anyway, it's surprised me in a way that I've been at this for 20 years because I'm a little ADD, and the idea that I'd spend basically not my whole career, but a big chunk of it on one thing in some ways surprises me. And I think, but I know why. It's that same woman, that Hannah that I met the first time, we've helped 100,000 Hannahs, and that didn't happen in year one. Year one, we did 500. Last year, this year we're on track to do 17,000 surgeries, so over 17,000 surgeries. So it didn't happen overnight, and we got better at it in terms of who we partner with and how we do this work efficiently. But it's knowing that beyond those numbers are individual women whose lives are going to be dramatically different. And it's not to sound arrogant. I wish there were more competition, if you will, in our category, but we sort of own it. We do more than the U.S. government. Even before the implosion of USAID, we do more than the UN, more than any other private charity. Again, I wish there were more competition, that there were more people doing this at scale. But I know that the work that we're doing, most of the time, probably the surgeries wouldn't happen without the foundation.
Wow. That is amazing. And I loved how you said we were talking about the giving the little voice inside you a mic. And many of our listeners maybe are in that in between space. They want to lead something that matters, very similar to what you're doing and what you've done over the years. But they're scared to. What would you say to that woman today who's holding a dream but afraid to start?
Well, it's the thing is that you learn by starting, and that doesn't mean, by the way, that you sell your house, immediately go back to graduate school, or some big move forward. Like I said, that took me a couple of years to warm up to. What did I start doing? I started getting books from the library. I'm very thrifty. So, I started getting books on career stuff from the library. And then I went to, because it was free at our public university. Maybe they now charge something for it, but I did, went and saw a career counselor. And I sort of warmed up to it, and I started talking to people. So I'm risk averse in some ways. It was in some ways risky, and I did, from a financial standpoint, that was a big deal to go from a six-figure salary to like zero, which is what graduate school was. But I didn't do it all at once. I sort of, reconnaissance, if you will, to really understand. And I talked to a bunch of people about what kind of career paths, what kind of training. And so that's what I would encourage your listeners to do, which is, depending on whatever your career path is, you don't have to start by just jumping. You can start by learning, because that makes that, in some ways, that takes some of the anxiety out of it. You meet other people that maybe did something. I know, without going too detail, I know of people that have gone back to school and, for instance, done a graduate degree in counseling where they were still working because they decided what they really wanted to do was, counsel troubled youth or whatever population. There are things that you could do that aren't necessarily, immediately I'm going to leave this and do that. I was late in having my one child. So at 31, I didn't have children to have to think about. In some ways I could focus only on the anxiety it would produce for myself. Other people's lives are more complicated, where you're making decisions and there's other little humans that you've given birth to that are involved. And so it can get complicated. But the first step is just like to understand yourself, like, again, give that voice to Mike, and then start talking to people. Often women have circles, and you talk to somebody. Do you know of somebody who's done this? Do you know somebody who's that? And it's funny how you can develop a kind of a net. I hate that network. It sounds like, when I think networking, I think of like cheap wine and plastic cups and name tags that say, "Hello, my name is." I hate that kind of networking. But the notion of finding people that are sisterly to you, your friends of friends, it can help you sort of see what that landscape looks like, what it might take to achieve your dream. That's where I would say is to start. And then that can bring energy into itself, because you meet people that are doing things that, I remember when I went and visited graduate schools and I first got the brochures in the mail. This was back before the internet. And Laura, I would sort of savor them. It was like, oh, that sounds so interesting, like what they're doing in the classes and stuff. And that might not be true. Somebody might not need to go back to school, and it might not be a course catalog, but conversations with people that are doing something similar to what you aspire to do, they can create energy on their own, and your own creativity about how you could see your path evolving.
I love that. And that is such great advice. And and I think that's, I loved how you were talking about, go read the free information that's out there and reach out to contacts, and just taking that step forward, I think really would help. If, despite the fear, like, the only way to overcome it is to take that step forward. Right. And there was also another thing that, like, kind of stuck out in your story was how emotionally intelligent your leadership style is. You're strategic, but deeply human. And that's something we talk a lot about on the show too. So, how has emotional intelligence shaped the way you lead a global organization?
Well, I'd say it's not dissimilar to the other answer. I didn't start out emotionally intelligent. I would say that I'm the daughter of a former Air Force pilot, and then became a physicist. Like my ex-husband used to say, "You want to go argue with Kate and her dad? Bring your footnotes." Both my parents were the first in their families to go to college, and both of my grandfathers had sixth grade education. So both of my parents were the big step up, and so in terms of emotional intelligence, I think that's evolved in my leadership style. I'm the oldest of four, so in some ways a natural. I'm the oldest in my generation, so I'm the oldest cousin, and everything else. So sort of naturally kind of pushy oldest kid, and then was president of my class in high school and graduate school. So sort of maybe leader-ish, if you will. But how I've gotten to be a better leader is frankly by making mistakes. I even talk about that in the book. I charged forward pretty hard. And in the first year, when there were only a couple of us, I just was doing a lot. I didn't have to lead anybody. There was a couple people, but mostly you're just doing a lot. You're dividing up stuff that has to get done. And then you start to get a big team. You realize your point about emotional intelligence, you have to develop that because you're only as successful as you can make everybody on the team working together. Like what I do singularly, there were a couple of us, that was really important because it was like, if I didn't show up, nothing was going to happen almost. I was the one driving it. But as you get bigger, you have to be the force multiplier by getting everybody else to work well together. And so my own emotional intelligence, I would say at work has evolved. I mean, in that I didn't start there. I can think about a bunch of mistakes I made of maybe being, I try to learn from them. One of the things that I do say, I've said this to my adult son, is if there's a problem that comes up in your life, try to start from the standpoint that you created it singularly. Now, often that isn't the case. I mean, somebody else does something wrong too, and you end up with a problem. Or maybe you get hit by a drunk driver, God forbid, but I mean, where you really are a victim. But a lot of times, if something's gone wrong, even interpersonally, maybe that's a part of, I've created that somehow. And the thing is, if you convert it, if you take the pain hit and say, I messed up, what did I get wrong? Because that's hard. Nobody wants to get things wrong. We don't want to be perfect. But if you take that in, the other thing is you empower yourself. You're not the victim. You're not like, oh, this person was bad to me. They're a bad person. I'm a victim. You're like, well, maybe I showed up and I was too trusting, or maybe maybe there's some part of this I didn't see. And so that, I guess I try to have that kind of transcend through the organization. I have a quote from Ray Dalio, the guy's best-selling, very famous kind of financial guy. And if I were in my office, I'd read it, but it's in essence, create an environment where it's acceptable to make mistakes, but unacceptable not to learn from them. And so I try to embrace that myself, which is almost the only way you learn, unless you're just precocious, which I'm not, is you make a mistake and you learn from it. And you just keep doing that. And so trying to create an environment where you don't beat people up if they make a mistake. I mean, you don't want the same mistake being made over and over again, but you want to create an environment where there's room for mistakes, because we're all human. We're going to make them anyway. Even in the best circumstances, we're wired to be imperfect. So like everything else, I would say it's evolved. I've gotten more emotionally sensitive. I didn't start there. If that makes any sense.
Oh, it does. It does. And I know that emotional leadership comes at a cost though, and we feel it all, right? Have there been moments where the weight of this work has felt like it's too much?
So I got really sick about a dozen years ago. When I say really sick, I ended up in a hospital in London, a cardiac ward, because but I picked up a bug in Chad in Central Africa. But the real story with Laura is I just ignored it. I'm just going to keep pushing through, just like kind of workaholic almost. I mean, not workaholic. I don't sleep in my office, and I was home to feed my kid dinner and things like that. But I just really didn't take very good care of myself. And that's not the hero's journey. That's the fool's journey. That's, and I learned from that, which is like, my body is not a robot that I can just program. If I'm not feeling well, if I'm sick, I need to take some time and get myself better. So Yeah, I mean, I guess the emotional weight of it, what I would say, and I learned this the hard way, when I first went back to graduate school, I saw myself like living in Africa and helping Africans in Africa. And the thing you asked, when I went and lived there, and this was the early 90s, and AIDS was still killing multitudes. The antiretrovirals, which just made it a treatable illness if you're lucky enough to have the medication anyway. It was just killing people. It was a death sentence. And they were killing mostly middle class Africans in their 20s and 30s, leaving a lot of kids that were orphaned, being taken care of by grandparents. And the destitution was too much. The dark nights of the soul there was I might want to help try to not solve these problems, but sort of affect change on them. But I'm too thin-skinned in a way, emotionally, so I can't live here. I can't. There were other reasons too. I really stood out. I'm a white woman, and
Right.
not that I traveled places, but I'd get, hey, rich girl, and I wasn't rich. I was a graduate student, but compared to Africans, I was rich. And it was that idea of being other. I have great empathy for people who come to our country and feel like they stand out, because I definitely stood out. And that combined with the poverty, that you talk about the weight on the soul, I just couldn't, it just didn't, I felt like sad a lot. And that because you can't fix the scale of it, it's too big. I can go back and live in the United States. I can travel to Africa. I don't have a problem going. And I particularly in the startup years, I was there a lot, but I sort of day in and day out, that was just not a good fit for me. There's things I know I couldn't do. I mean, like you look at nurses and doctors who work like in pediatric oncology. I couldn't do that. I couldn't do it. I mean, I have such respect for people that can show up with their full heart and somehow not end up clinically depressed. Really, there's a reason that I work and live in California, or not necessarily California doesn't have to be here, but live in the United States. So that was a limitation of mine.
And I think that would probably be for me too. I'm sensitive, especially when it comes to children, like anything with children, and then just seeing the wide scale poverty. I've always wanted to go there. That was a goal, is to do a mission over there, some type of helping in some capacity. But I don't know if my heart could handle it. Like, I don't know. But
For a short period of time, it might be very enriching. It is a lot better. Like if you look at just child survival, level of literacy, like when I first traveled to Africa, the literacy rate was, I don't know, it was 30, 40%. And now it's 70%. For instance, our program in Africa is run by an African doctor. Like our whole staff in Africa is African. Now, 30 years ago, when I was in graduate school, it was much more normative to have people that were, European or American running development programs. Now there's just been, an acceleration of people in Africa. When we were hiring for this position, what we hired this wonderful woman for, we had a wealth of candidates. I mean, a number of Africans with graduate degrees, PhDs. I mean, it's just that you wouldn't have seen 30 years ago. Not, of course, because Africans aren't smart, but because colonialism, and a weak education system kept people from kind of achieving the education they're getting now. So I would encourage you to go. I mean, at least, I don't know, for a relatively short period of time, just to see how you take to it. But it's a lot better. The advent of these antiretrovirals that have made AIDS, I would say, a manageable health condition, but compared to what it was in the early to mid 90s, which was, apocalypse almost. It's hard for people, I think, now to gather how bad it was. Any millions of people were dying, mostly in Africa.
one of my friend's husbands, and I cannot remember his name right now, but he developed helped develop one of the antivirals for AIDS. It was a big, goodness, I cannot think of his name right now. He has passed though since, but remarkable work. And like you said, it's changed the trajectory of people, their lives, how long they're living and their quality of life, and, living normal lives now because of these antivirals. So I This conversation is just amazing. I love this. So let's go back to the fistula for a moment, and I know you did share a little bit about it and like what it was. And I'll be honest, before your book, before we were communicating, I had never heard of it. Now, like I kind of heard of it, but it was more something I heard that sometimes cancer patients may get on occasion.
Yeah. It can happen to us like radiation where basically, it's a hole, like a fistula is a hole. And so unlike what most women have heard of, or even experienced are like tearing injuries, baby comes out too fast before there's an episiotomy, a tearing. This is like holes. And you're right. You sometimes hear about it in this country, a radiation like that goes in the wrong place, or also, sometimes what's called iatrogenic, which is a fancy word for somebody made a mistake. And for instance, a C-section where maybe somebody's been a little sloppy with a scalpel. You can end up with those. But generally, those injuries are then fixed. At least the ones that are associated with childbirth are fixed before the woman leaves the hospital. So, yeah, there are. And like I said at the outset, there are different kinds of fistula. You'll have some of those people that have, I know a friend that has Crohn's disease, for instance, and so she's had to deal with, basically holes in digestive tract that are, unfortunately created by inflammation and creates a hole. So it's sort of a generic term, but Obstetric Fistula Foundation, the URL, the website address was way too long, so we're just the Fistula Foundation. But yeah.
And it's affecting millions of women globally, but would you say it's just access to healthcare and poverty is why it's so invisible?
Well, the thing is, in sub-Saharan Africa, roughly half the births occur at home. And the thing is, that used to be the case here. My father was born in 1929, actually the 31st. Like he'd been born like 12 hours later, he would have been born in 1930. But he was delivered at home, again, in Butte, Montana. But that sounds like, oh my gosh, they must have been really poor. Oh, they were sort of poor, but that was actually normative, that you went to a hospital if there was a problem. But if you didn't, you delivered at home. And so what does that mean? It basically means the reason that this injury happens is lack of access to emergency obstetric care. And I write about this a bit in the book, and not to become little Debbie Data here about healthcare information, but like your odds of dying in labor and childbirth and in pregnancy and childbirth in sub-Saharan Africa, it depends on the country. It can be like a lifetime average, not a single birth, because they have more women, they have more children, so that impacts it. But it can be somewhere in the end of like odds of 1 in 30, 1 in 50, depending on the country. Okay, so I mean, most women don't die. I mean, but still, that's fairly prevalent. Well, in the U.S., it's closer to 1 in 3,000. And if you go to the EU, which has better healthcare than we do here, because we have racism in our healthcare system. It's why the differential for maternal mortality is like a factor of 2 if you're Black versus white. But in any case, Europe, I think it's 1 in 11,000. I mean, the order of magnitude of like dying or in a childbirth related activity is just huge. And again, what we take for granted, I certainly did, is hospital-based deliveries. Like I had a C-section. I mean, my child was big and he wasn't going anywhere. And after 24 hours of labor and 4 hours of pushing, he had a fever. That's not good. So they did a C-section. It wasn't quite emergency, like he was, strangled, like had a cord around his neck or something like that. But it was still pretty rushed and upsetting for me. But I left the hospital with a healthy baby and C-section scars, but there was no point in that process where I was imperiled or my son. Now, if that birth had happened in a hut in sub-Saharan Africa, it's entirely possible. I mean, it's likely actually that he would have died, because that's normally what happens is the baby dies and then you deliver a stillborn baby. So he would have died. Would I have ended up with a fistula? Maybe. Could I have, again, had my uterus rupture? Maybe. Could I end up with sepsis because you're fully dilated? So there's a lot of germs going up into your uterus. All that stuff's possible, but it doesn't happen here generally because births happen in hospitals. And, even if you're undocumented in this country, if you show up at an emergency room and you're in labor and they will help you deliver the baby. And if it's a C-section needed, you will get the C-section. Now, you might be chased for the rest of your life what it costs, but you will be treated and you will leave the hospital. They're not going to put you in, debtor's prison and that day. But the same's not true in sub-Saharan Africa. If you don't have the money, they might not treat you. Plus, there's maybe not even a hospital that's close enough for you to get to while you're in labor down a dirt road or whatever else. It's just there's a lack of doctors. Here's the other thing, just again, poverty, poverty, poverty. The US, there's roughly one doctor for every 400 people. Now, it varies depending on where in the country you're living. Some rural areas have fewer doctors per capita. But so just round numbers, one doctor for every 400 people. Sub-Saharan Africa, depending on the country, it's anywhere from one doctor every 5,000 people, Laura, to one doctor every 10,000 people. And so there's just a lack of it, in a way, just a scale of need that's, again, it's poverty, poverty, poverty that's quite profound. Now, I'll put my feminist hat on just for a second. I don't wear it too tightly, but the poorer the country, often the more unequal the resource allocation, where girls are fed less than boys, girls get less education than boys get, they certainly have less political power. And why does that make a difference with maternal health? Well, only women give birth, right? Only women are the ones who take 100% of the risk to bring everybody into the world. Men don't take they're not going to die in child. They don't give birth. So why don't women get the resources they need? Well, it is poverty, 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 a paucity of doctors. That's obviously a big issue. It's not all, gender inequality, but a piece of it is. As the great Oprah Winfrey said, and I quoted her in my book, she did one show about 20 years ago. This was speaking about fistula, not about labor and delivery, but she said something along the lines of, if there were men with holes in the penis, there would be a whole hole in the penis commission. We would have this problem. That part is a direct quote, a whole hole in the penis commission. I was like, man, does that woman have a way with words?
Guys.
Just, and of course, her audience at the time is laughing, but there's some truth in that, which is the injury happens to poor women in poor places. And again, not to get to, because it's mostly poverty, but the gender and poverty working together. Justin Trudeau, the former prime minister in Canada, said, poverty is sexist. Maybe others have said it as well, but it's true actually. And poverty affects women and girls worse than it does men and boys. Of course, it's bad for everybody. I'm not saying that men and boys have a good time in a poor country either, but I think I think that's part of the reason this is so pernicious.
I have to agree with you. I agree with that. You've created one of the most successful nonprofits in the world, and without, I read, government funding. Is that right?
Yeah, without government funding. And I'm not like some strident libertarian where we can't take government money. We just don't. It's not that. It's that the U.S. government contracting process was so laden in red tape and so onerous, it just wasn't worth it. And I write about this in the book. When I got out of graduate school, I went to Capitol Hill, worked in the House Foreign Affairs Committee, which has oversight of the U.S. government. That's, the branches of government. Then I went and worked in the executive branch. I worked for the head of USAID. And I met a lot of smart, hardworking people. So it isn't about the quality of the individuals, but the system was like the DMV or something. I mean, I'm exaggerating slightly, but it's just a system that wasn't engineered to work for the maximization of the poor people in Africa. There were and it's political. So part of it is, all the goods that are sourced in the US that are shipped over to Africa. Okay, that makes producers of, say, a condom for AIDS prevention, they'd sign on to foreign aid. But if you're the poor in Africa, you're getting a de minimis amount of what's been spent because you're buying it for, multiples of what you could source the same product in Asia. And then you're shipping it with US containers all the way from, some landlocked place in the US to someplace in Africa. So it's not to pick on anybody. There were some people there that I admired, but the system itself was just, the legislation was set up in 1961. I mean, before we had laptops, before there were cell phones, I mean, and you look at some of the organizations that were big USAID contractors, and again, it's not that people were stealing. It's not that. It's just a cumbersome system that wasn't producing outcomes. And so for us, we talked about it. I thought, like, no, I'd have to have a whole different contracting operation. I think we'd end up spending a lot of money, and we're just not going to do that. And there's a number of organizations that I have great respect for that also don't take government money, not as a matter. This isn't like Doctors Without Borders, an organization that maybe is familiar to your listeners. He's done heroic work for 50 years. I think they started in Biafra in Nigeria during a war there that was, harming a lot of innocent people in the 1960s. Anyway, they made it a matter of policy to not take money from any government. Well, that's because they were in war zones, and you don't want to pick sides in the war. Are you for this or that? Are you for the Protestants or the Catholics? Are you for the Palestinians or the Israelis? Whatever it is, you're not going to do that. You just we want to help people.
Right.
The reason for doing it isn't that we're not I can't touch government money because we're working in an apolitical area, which is women with holes in their vaginas that need help.
Right.
It's just the system was so just antiquated, and it's hard to, I mean, in fairness to both political parties, it's hard to reform a big bureaucracy. There's a lot of people that benefit from the status quo.
Yes.
Problem, the people that are benefiting are not the poor in Africa. That's the brutal truth.
I agree. I mean, I've worked in government. I know how chaotic it is, and there's nothing efficient. So I think you made a smart decision with that. And what do you wish more people knew about how real change happens? Like, obviously you found that out through with the funding piece, and how, you're making real change with that. What do you think, what do you wish more people knew about it?
Well, I guess the basic thing is what I wish people knew is, with good charities or ones that are really focused on, I would say, outcomes, not inputs, not what we're spending money on, but what can we demonstrate? What can we prove gets done with the money? That the dollar goes so far. Like, our average cost per surgery is $633. That's a real number. In other words, it's a weighted average across, all of our partners. And $633, that's not a small amount of money. That's more than I give to most charities every year. But the thing is that I know that what that does to a woman's life, it really does give her, decades of health. And so I think our donors, the ones that give to us, are attracted by the idea of, I can make a huge change. Some of our donors tithe, and give us whatever it is, $53 a month or whatever it is, so that they pay for a surgery. It's a little more than that now. Anyway, $55. I should be able to do the fast math. But anyway, they give us whatever it is a month that totals up to, $630, and have the sense of satisfaction that they've, funded a single surgery. Other people give us less, and then we, all those little pieces together and come up with the amount of money. But it's the idea of that kind of tangible impact. And 20 years in, I say we've got the receipts. It's why we were able to get money from Mackenzie Scott's advisors, the billionaire. We've got a very powerful Salesforce platform that we customize. And as we talked at the outset, I had a typewriter when I was in college, so that wasn't built by me. I'm a talent scout, so I hire smart people to build things. But now it is, you can look at those 100,000 surgeries, where they went, exactly what countries, what quarters, which hospitals. We've got, as I said, the receipts on being able to do it. And so to people listening, I guess what I would say is, there's a lot of unnecessary suffering that's been created by the implosion of USAID. And I think Bill Maher, the comedian, said something along the lines of, it's like remodeling your house by just burning everything down, including anything of value. It was not a smart way to do it. What I would say is, there's an ecosystem, if you look for it, out there, of organizations like ours that are very focused on outcomes, not inputs. In other words, how can we get the poorest of the poor the help they need, whether that's an insecticide treated bed net. There's the cleft palate organization like Smile Train that does cleft palate surgeries. Other organizations, they don't generally take government money, that move the needle. So I do think I think it's possible. My hope with the U.S. government is that right now it's a hope, because I haven't seen any evidence of this, that they'll pull together some people, not necessarily me, but people that are doing good work without government, and say, what can we learn? if we're going to reinvent this thing, let's do it in a way that, makes sense and seizes lessons from people that have been doing this without government, not try to replicate what was there before exactly.
I agree with that. I agree with that. Let's hope they do. I hope they do. Now, you wrote this book, No Woman Left Behind, not to just to tell your story, but honestly to spark a movement. So what's your hope for women who read it?
Well, I hope a couple things, I guess. One is that they'll have the reaction like you did, Laura, which is like, oh my gosh, I didn't know about this. I'm moved by this. What can I do to help? Because I said at the very beginning, the hardest thing for us as an organization is to get sustained attention because since it doesn't affect women here, people don't see it in their day-to-day lives. They don't read about it generally in the paper. One of the hardest things we do is get attention. That's the reason I wrote the book, talking to you and through you to your listeners is to create awareness of this and hopefully support for it. And and so my hope is people go, oh my gosh, I didn't know. I learned something. This is valuable. I understand I can do something to help, which is great in this world that's so dark. I can't fix everything, but I can light a candle for these women. I can help, their life be better and not filled with darkness. I can give them hope. And that's my hope with the book, I guess.
Well, I think it does. And I mean, it it sparks something in me like we as women need to come together and support women everywhere. And when woman is in pain and cries, we all do. And I mean, I just can't believe that there were women suffering like that. And, we just we're in our own little space here and just so grateful for people like you who have went out of their comfort zone, went and making this happen and saving people. You're saving lives and just changing lives. I'm just in awe with what you're doing and just inspired. Now, I do want to talk about the mamas. This community is full of women who are raising babies and hopefully have never had to deal with fistula or anything like that. But they're also building businesses. They're showing up in places they weren't always invited to. And what does it mean to you to mother a movement? And I feel like you are doing that.
Well, the thing is, it's funny you say that because in the book, one of the things I said was, and it was actually my son, who's 25 now, said, the foundation is like your second child. And at first, when he said that, I was taken aback because I was like, oh, but does that somehow make me a bad mom? Like that I was giving so much energy to the foundation. And when we started talking, I was like, no, I took him with me sometimes. He was able to see African, Asian, seeing things that otherwise he probably wouldn't have seen. And I wasn't a workaholic. I was home and I think most of the time. And so I don't think it was diminishing to him, I guess. But the idea of nurturing something, of continuing like you do with your kids, where you're never sort of not thinking about them. I mean, sometimes you are, sitting in a movie, you're not thinking about your kids, but they're kind of woven through your consciousness. With your thinking about your kids of how you help them thrive and grow and get through problems and seize new opportunities and your brain's, it's a fluid thing. And I would say the foundation is similarly. I think about it a lot and most of that's not pressure. It's how do I do more with this? Is there people we can connect to help us grow? And so there is sort of mama bear energy. I do love it. I get one of these weird questions years ago. If you won the lottery, I was like, I might have bought a new car. I mean, but I wasn't gonna leave my job. I really and those are some jobs that we love. It's a profound gift to do work that you love doing. And I would say back to the mama bear energy, in your family, you love the people that are part of your family. And that's part of the reason that you give to them yourself, your consciousness, your heart. That's why you hurt when they hurt. I would say with the foundation, one of the things that I'm so lucky is the people we get that it attracts. I would say the surgeons, the ones that do this work, that we pay to do this work, they could easily be working in a capital city, making a lot of money, working on rich women or comparatively rich. Instead, they're often working in, the remote rural parts of Africa. They're working in resource-constrained hospitals. They're working with incontinent women that are often outcasts, the least among us, as some might say. And those are some amazing people. And and then you get the donors, people that step up and say, I want to help incontinent women I'm never going to meet in a country I'm never going to visit. I mean, it attracts some uncommonly good people. I was saying to somebody earlier, like in 20 years, I could count on one hand and still have a few fingers left over of the number of difficult sort of donors I've ever dealt with. And I mean, difficult, just, whatever, but it just doesn't happen. It attracts some really, really great people. And so back to the mama bear energy, it's not that hard to have mama bear energy for people who you love because they're extending themselves. If the definition of love is you're extending yourself for somebody else. The doctors are doing that and our donors are doing that. And I get to be in the middle of that. And whatever I can do to, help expand it somehow, I'm a lucky girl.
Yes, you're amazing. What would you say to the woman who's listening and thinking, I'm just a mom. I don't have time, the platform, the energy to make a difference?
First, I would say I would remove just from that sentence.
Love you. Yes.
Just from that sentence, because is there any more important work that's ever done in the world than it's not just having children and bringing them into the world, it's nurturing so they become good, productive, kind human beings. Like, there's nothing more important than that. In my mind, there isn't. And you might say, well, wait a second, you only had one, then it wasn't that important to you. I mean, I ran out of time. I mean, the clock ran out. I had a difficult pregnancy. I mean, anyway, I need to go down that road, but I don't think there's anything that's more important than any of us do than raising children. So I would start with one, it's not just. Two, no matter how many you have, but the more you have, the more demanding that is because each child they're their own little universe. You can't, like, one size doesn't fit all. And that's incredibly, I would say, to do it right and well, immersive and taxing in the sense of what's best for these unique creatures you help create. And so to actually create more time to sort of dream your own dreams, that's a hero's journey in and of itself because that takes time on top of, permission slips and lunch boxes and, ear infections and, all the stuff that, takes our time as moms. So be forgiving and kind to yourself and realize what you're doing is heroic in and of itself. And then creating some additional space, partly also so when your kids grow, that you don't need you as much. I think, you have teens and it's different with teens because they need you to be there sort of, but not like every minute. You have to kind of be adjacent when they want to come talk to you, but to have some sort of sense of what your glide path might look like later, you can start, like we talked about at the outset, you can start. It doesn't have to be doing much of anything other than conversations. And maybe if you're a reader, it's getting books from the library. It's talking to your local career center. Like when I did, they had me take a few, I forgot about this, but they had a couple of different tests. Now, these weren't like IQ tests, but they were to really sort of smoke me out on what it is I wanted to do,
Oh, yeah.
um,
Like a
and
Myers-Briggs type test.
kind of like Myers-Briggs. And there was another one that was fascinating where they just a bunch of sentences where there were words missing and you just had to it was like almost like stream of consciousness. You didn't we're supposed to think, greatest fear is I get most of my excitement out of this. I want to do this before I die, whatever. And the idea was just go through it really quickly. And maybe because it was a public school, like if you had your own private career counselor, maybe they'd explore all this stuff. But that wasn't what I had more the cheap version of career counseling. But most of it was just provocative. I did a lot of journal writing at that point. And that even with a child, you can do that if you carve out some time that was my way of kind of in my own kind of therapy, almost of getting in touch with what it is I wanted to do. So I would say be forgiving that you don't have that many hours extra to plow forward, but that doesn't mean you can't start moving. You don't have to head out 50 miles an hour. You can start taking baby steps and learning as you go. And parenting, as you know, you said you have 5, so that I can't even just comprehend. I don't even have time for you to sit here to talk to me right now because I can't even comprehend that.
Can't sometimes either.
Yeah. So but at some point, even they will leave and you'll have more time. It's hard when you're in the middle of it to ever conceive that at some point they won't be there needing everything all the time. But yeah, I don't, that's a very long answer to your question. I don't know whether that's helpful or
No,
not.
it was great. It was perfect. It was so perfect. So I have a couple more questions. I know I literally could talk to you, I think probably 2 or 3 hours straight. You are so fascinating and just have a wealth of information. And this has just been an amazing conversation. But you've helped transform these 100,000 lives. I have to ask you, how has this journey transformed you?
It's interesting. I guess, in the go-go years, it's like we were startup-y. When we started, there were two of us and, well, three. Terry worked till two. It had her high school GED and she processed the checks, and then Anna had started up as my admin. So we were very tiny, and we've got offices in 4 countries, and we've grown a lot, obviously. And so I would say in the beginning, you're just trying to get a lot done. You're not, I mean, you're reflecting, but not a lot. And it's writing the book was I would say cathartic, but I think I mined a lot of what I, had gone through. And I mentioned this a bit in the book. I lost both my parents with and a dog in between in about 6 months. And my dad had leukemia, so we knew that was going to happen. But mom, like, we had Easter and then she went in the hospital and she never came out. It's not a nightmare. She wasn't like she was felled at, 50 or something. She was older, but it was still just, whoa. She was just, wow, how did that happen? And a dog, not that the dog weighs the parents, but it was just sort of a lot of loss. And I started writing as sort of a catharsis. In fact, I took vacation time. I didn't write it, when I was at work, because I thought, I'm not sure I even have a book there. And part of it was just trying to escape from the grief. And so what I'm left with is mostly a sense of gratitude. Like I was saying earlier about these people that sometimes you take, it's like that Joni Mitchell song, the line, you don't know what you got till it's gone. And I think that was true of my parents, unfortunately, maybe true. Other people feel that way too. They're sort of part of your day, like the sun that comes up and then they're not there. And like, wait a second, how can that be? But I think in some ways with the foundation, I was so involved in just building it up. I mean, there were times I was like, oh, these are great people I get to work with. But I took a step back and I thought, like, no, this is an uncommonly good set of people that are attracted to this for like just such moving reasons. And to be very present with how lucky it is to have been in this sort of center of that, I mean, and not to take anything away from people I met, in government or in advertising. I mean, advertising are some really creative people, and it's not they were bad people, but you're maximizing around profit. I mean, yes, you want to produce high quality ads because they'll sell more product, but this isn't, you're not out trying to maximize well-being. You're trying to sell something. And I would say with politics, one thing with Washington that was, I think I went there with such naivety. There's so much about that that's blood sport, where sort of truth gets lost on both sides. I mean, and I just found it sort of discouraging. Now, a lot of good comes out of all that. I mean, which, drinking water out of the tap and, a defense establishment that keeps us from being invaded. And I mean, there's lots of good that comes out of political processes. But for me, I don't know, it just wasn't my thing. But so mostly, I guess I said left with gratitude more than anything else when I reflect back, just lucky, go lucky.
Yeah, I mean, did you ever envision like you would be impacting to this, back when you first started, like you were going to change 100,000 people's lives?
No, that wasn't, I mean, no, I mean, when we first were starting out, I would say I did, and I wrote about this a little bit in the book. My old advertising thinking came to the fore, and this sounds cold, but to think about like, what's the product and what's our product? Because we're trying to get people to give us money. And there's a lot of problems in Africa, in terms of even fistula. You could work on fistula prevention and try to train midwives. You could provide contraception because there's a lot of data that says if women can space their children, they're going to have healthier births. There's a lot of things we could work on. And I thought, you know what? I think we need to figure out where we think the marginal difference is greatest. And I thought back to Hannah in that hospital, I said, I think it's surgery. And let's put blinders on. And we're not going to we do a bunch of nice things because we're nice people. I mean, we are nice people. We do nice things, but let's be much more tough-minded. Where do we think we can make the biggest difference? And then let's say no to a lot of other good stuff. We're not the Good Stuff Foundation. We're going to just be the Fistula Foundation. But I didn't have, it's when I look back, I was trying to make good decisions and I made a lot of mistakes. Sort of that even I would say to your listeners is like, just start. The work will teach you. start even your career path. Don't feel like you have to have it all worked out. I didn't have this grant. I mean, I had a plan of like we're going to focus on surgeries. We
Right.
started one hospital at a time. I didn't have this grand plan about how this was going to go. We started with one hospital. We were like, okay, now we're going to need more money. I'm not going to overshoot the skis. We don't have enough money to fund more hospitals. I need to raise the money to be able to fund more hospitals. And so it was that sort of dutiful steps forward. And then I look back and go, wow. I mean, not that there weren't moments a lot on the last 20 years where I went like, yeah, this is working. But most of the time, and this is probably true of most, I'd say I'm a social entrepreneur. Most of the time, you're just trying to get stuff done. You're not sitting back and go, whoa, this is amazing. You're mostly like, how do I connect the next dot? Hence, I'm talking to you. I mean, we're reflecting a bit, but part of this is because I obviously want your listeners to know about what we do. And I'm grateful for your interest, Laura, in giving us space to do that.
Well, I'm honored to be part of this story. So thank you for letting me to be a part of it. And, I could talk, like I've told you, I could talk to you for hours, and you've reminded me, and I know our listeners too, that purpose doesn't need to be perfect and leadership doesn't need to be loud to be powerful. Before we go, do you have any final word for our listeners?
Take pride in the children you're raising.
I love that.
Yeah. And obviously think about what your path is going to look like when you're not a full-time mom. I mean, we're all going to be moms, but the difference when I know, well, I only had one, but when they go, I mean, they still are back. They're not still your child, but it's not the same. And this is sort of negative, not negative. I don't mean it to be, but I have had friends who hadn't maybe thought about what that next thing is.
Mm.
And okay, then they think about it when the house is empty. But I think the ones that have had an easier path are the ones that start. Again, it doesn't have to be leaving something. It's just starting to sort of think about it. What could that next thing look like, so that it isn't sort of the abrupt halt in the empty nest and no more eggs to fry kind of thing, or at least for now. And that they've already thought about what that next thing is, which in some ways is a gift to your children too, because I think sometimes they want to know that
You're going to be okay too. Yes, and I have so many friends that are going through that right now, and that is amazing advice. That's one thing I worried, but I kind of started mine. I have like my three older ones, and then I have a 10-year gap, and then surprise bonus, surprise bonus.
oh wow, lucky you.
So I don't know. It's kind of like our first three are out the house now. Then we have our two littles that are home. They're 8 and 4. Well, no, he just turned 5. So
Gosh, I'm almost envious. Yeah, I just started to like that would be the thing I would have told my younger self, which is you're gonna like this more than you thought, and don't wait. I mean, I did wait. I mean, but I'm so grateful that I didn't completely wait, if you know what I mean. But aren't you blessed to have so many? Lucky you. That's great. That would be another conversation altogether, Laura, of how you found time with 5 children to dream all this up.
that is a good conversation. I think I'm just one foot in front of the other, just like you. There's been a lot of mess in between, but just going forward.
I think there's a lot of wisdom in that. Just keep moving.
You're moving. Thank you again, Kate, for being here, for this conversation, for the work you're giving your life to, and just for showing us all what it means to say yes to a calling. And to all my Mommas Who Lead community, if this conversation has lit something inside you, please share it, talk about it, and pick up a copy of No Woman Left Behind. Every purchase funds a surgery for a woman who desperately needs it. And if you have in your heart, visit the fistulafoundation.com, where you can learn about ways that you can help further with that foundation. And just remember, we don't need more perfect women. We just need more willing women. So until next time, keep leading, keep growing, and keep believing in what's possible.